Hello, friends on the internet. Welcome to Driving and Dragons, where we just hit the magic 500 subscriber number where I can create member sections and start to give back a little. Other than the typical bonus content, what kind of perks do you think would be great value adds for loyal subscribers who want to support the channel? Right now, I'm thinking members will get, to have a say in what cars I fix up in the future. They'll get extra chances when I draw winners for the cars, when and if that ever becomes a reality, and get a few other members only opportunities and giveaways just to say thank you. Live streams aren't really my thing, but who knows? Maybe those will happen and the whole super chats / members comments things will become a factor too. I definitely got some time though. Still need a few hundred watch hours to make the cut. So enough of that. It is time to visit an old playlist and find out how you're doing it wrong when you vet new players seeking to join your table. This is a requested video, and it's a pretty obvious why. If you look on YouTube, you will find hundreds, if not thousands, of videos about how gatekeeping is evil and how to let more people into your games and all kinds of content about helping new people feel comfortable and even a fair number of how to deal with problem players videos. What you won't find is a wealth of information on how to stop this from being a problem in the first place, so I'm here to help, or to at least try to help. First, a little background and a few definitions so that we're all up to speed on this video's content. First up is gatekeeping. For the purpose of this video, gatekeeping is simply the act of preventing people from bringing undesirable elements into your game. This isn't about the broader subject of preventing people from bringing harmful ideas and practices into the hobby as a whole, nor is it about putting pressure on designers and publishers to force them to course correct away from detrimental practices that cause long-term damage to the TTRPG space as a whole. These are topics for a whole different video. This is about gatekeeping on a group level and a public game level. It's about protecting your specific gaming table. Second is vetting. This is simply the process of, to the extent possible, identifying undesirable traits in a prospective player before allowing them a seat at your table. I'm also going to use 3 shorthand terms. Once again, these are being used as a shorthand. Don't go thinking you've got some prolific argument because you have a more detailed or alternative use of these terms. I'm aware they exist, but for the purposes of this monologue, a private game is a game where players who personally know one or more other members of the group from outside of the game come together to play, typically in person. A virtual game is a game that's set up online via voice chat or virtual tabletop among players largely recruited from the web and for the purposes of playing the game. And a public game is an open table at a convention, game shop, or other venue where the game is advertised and open to players until a certain number of seats are filled. As for the background here, I've been a game master for over 25 years, and I have largely been the person exclusively responsible for finding, vetting, and recruiting players for my tables. I run virtual games and public games, but the vast majority of my history has been running private, in-person games. Part of why long-lasting private games have been a part of my life is because of good luck with people I've met, and another big part is because of how I vet players before giving them a seat at the table. There is one disclaimer that I have to make before we hit the meat of this issue, and this is a bit of a tough one for me, honestly, this topic. I had to sit down and really think about it because for me, this is a very natural process. Reading people has been part of my professional life since the day I was old enough to get a worker's permit. So a lot of how I vet players is kind of a natural process for me. It's no different than how I assess customers to find out what their needs are, what their hot button issues are, and the things that are important to them, as well as things that may or may not trigger them in one direction or another. So I'm really kind of describing how I breathe in a way. There isn't much that can kill a gaming group faster than a player who disrupts the harmony at the table. Sometimes introducing the wrong player can be so disruptive that it drives players completely out of the hobby altogether, or it fractures a long-standing group. At the minimum, a poorly vetted player can poison a campaign, leading to, an unceremonious end of what could have been a fun, long-lasting game. We all have those stories about that character we rolled up but never really got to play and always wanted to go back to at some point. And we don't want that to be because the character got associated with the sour taste of an asshole who ruined the game. Vetting a player can be difficult. It doesn't have to be, and for some of us it isn't just naturally, but it certainly can be, and the type of game you're running will also present its own unique challenges to that gatekeeping process to prevent these people from coming into your table. Private games are largely the lowest stakes and the easiest when it comes to vetting. Often the players being brought in are friends of friends, or at least have some kind of other outside tie to at least one member of the group. They also often have a more stable and durable membership. And to top it off, the worst issue that a bad decision typically brings is that a bored player who sees the game as more of a social excuse, a gathering for a social or an excuse for a social gathering, comes in rather than seeing it as a specific hobby and detracts by only half participating or derailing serious moments with jokes and antics. It's not to say that a real stinker can't be brought in who messes up a campaign, but in general, the worst risks are some hurt feelings, a short-lived campaign, or a person in your house that you would really rather not invite back. Another big advantage private games has is there's not as much of a rush on vetting people. I think this might be why it's kind of perceived that there was less of a problem with bad players back in the day before internet gaming for TTRPGs really became a thing. And that's because you didn't have big rushes. Like you couldn't get a couple of people together and say, hey, we're going to play Dungeons and Dragons. And then while you're going out to find a third, the other two just magically found 6 other games that week that they could go join. It didn't really work that way. It wasn't that quick to access. So you generally had more time. And on these private games, especially if you're playing in person, a lot of times you do have more time to go through that gatekeeping process. Virtual games carry a bit more risk in terms of the game and the group as a whole. Setting aside pickup games and pickup groups, the level of commitment that is found in an online tabletop role-playing game is laughable at best. Players sign up to play, then never accept server invites. Players who were gung-ho a week ago have dropped you for another game in the meantime while you were trying to find that final player to get a full party. It really is a mess of instant gratification nonsense that often leads to a hire the masses and fire their asses approach, which then in turn leads to the r/horror stories and requests for videos on how to vet players. It ironically also makes vetting itself infinitely more important. Online groups rarely survive a poorly vetted player, unless a core group of 3 or more have some other significant tie to keep them together. In a classic catch-22, you take the time to vet and you struggle to get a game started. You don't take the time and you will likely kill whatever game you have. All you can do is try to vet quickly. And then you have the public games. These present an entirely different host of issues. For one, vetting has to be quick. Most of these games are not carefully crafted affairs with prearranged groups of friends. You're playing with a limited selection of people who showed up at the venue. In some cases, you aren't even vetting to allow someone at the table. You're vetting to determine if you need to keep a finger on the proverbial kick button. You can't say no because maybe they paid for a seat at the table, or perhaps the shop that you're at has some kind of no exclusion rule where there's open seats and they have to be offered to any paying customer who buys access to the gaming room. Another concern is the flip side of that coin. Will this player end up getting us all kicked out of the venue because they're the type who seem to think that the game shop owner's rules about sexual content or foul language don't apply to them because, quote unquote, they paid to be here. Luckily, in a public game, the ever present social pressures can often help minimize, or at least minimize the severity of problem player behaviors. So, how does one go about vetting? That's the $1,000,000 question. I hate to say it, but a lot of it is your own ability to divorce yourself from the excitement of playing the game and getting a new group together to experience the world that you want to share, so that you can dispassionately look for red flags and then make some hard judgments that do not give a person a seat at the table. Like that is a hard judgment call to make sometimes. You're excited. You can't wait to play the game. You want to get people together. Maybe you're on that BTT or that virtual group, that online group, and you know that you're going to have players looking for other tables while you're trying to find somebody. And that judgment call sometimes isn't the best in the world, especially when it's a decent person, somebody you don't mind hanging out with. Maybe they're even a personal friend, but they're not right for the table. The core of the TTRPG social contract is most easily summed up in the expression, don't be a dick. And it can feel like you're being a dick when you make the call to count somebody out based on a first impression. But that social contract also puts the responsibility of maintaining a cohesive group on the game master. Them's the breaks. And when you choose to sit behind the screen, that's what you got to deal with. One hard, fast rule, and I mean this with just all the importance and gravity that I can put on it when it comes to playing games. A hard, fast rule is that vetting happens before introduction. Not at session 0, not in a Discord server with all the other players there, not at a table in the game store with everyone sitting around waiting to play. The best thing that you can do is take 15 to 20 minutes to have a one-on-one conversation with that player before bringing them to the group. How is it wrong to include the whole table straight from the jump? I'll give you an example. Let's say you put something on a scale of 1 to 10. We're going to use something nice and non-polarizing here as an example. Politics. 1 is a radical social leftist who glues their hands to a Monet painting to protest the oil company that made the glue they used. And 10 is an anarcho-capitalist who doesn't understand that the non-aggression principle doesn't prevent bastards from being bastards without some formal anti-bastard authority to enforce said principle, nor that self-enforcement doesn't work if the people who are violating the NAP have more and or bigger guns than you. Your group has, we'll say, a 4, 2 6s, and a 7 in it. 7 and 4 can tolerate each other because neither is particularly obnoxious about it. And when things come up, everybody just kind of says, all right, guys, let's get back to the game. And it's all good again. But here's the thing. 4 and 7 are at each other's limits. They have just enough common ground that they can play the game and have fun without stepping on each other's toes to the point that a real issue arises. 7 really can't go farther left than 4 without being seriously offended and irritated on a regular basis. 4 can't go past 7 without istphobing everybody into oblivion and start talking about how speech is real violence. So they're at each other's limits. So you bring in a potential new player. That player is a 3. If you talk to this player on your own, you quickly recognize that your 7 is going to have a coronary if this guy shows up. And even the 6s are probably going to find him irritating. Even worse, he may cause your 4 to show out some, pushing your 7 even further away. He gets a little bit more ass in his jeans or something. He's got some more support now. So you make the call. Mr. 3, you're just too far misaligned from the rest of the group, and no amount of no politics rules are going to prevent this radical difference in social and political values from becoming a problem. Sorry, don't think we'll be a good fit here. But you decided to invite him into the group setting and see how everyone feels instead of just vetting him on your own. Now, if you bounce him, your 4 could easily feel like that token outsider and like everybody's against him. After all, he thought that guy was awesome, and he finally had a guy on, quote, his side, since the 6s were way more like the 7. Maybe you let him stay and 7 drops out while the 6s sit there wondering why you let this annoying new guy run off the dude who was there first. Say it's a totally new pre-first session 0 group. You may have the 6s and the 7, all 3 decide to look elsewhere instead. The point is that by doing the vet as a group thing, it's all risk and no reward. It should only be done if you are adding a person to a well-established group with a significant history of stability, should you ever start doing that kind of thing. The way I like to do it in my groups is I have a conversation with the new addition, ask some questions, get a feel for them. If they pass the sniff test, I typically get one or more of the foundational members of my group involved to get a final decision. A player who has been part of the group for a while and who I know I can count on to not bullshit around trying to, quote, not be mean, and will flat out say something like, Daniel, you know good and well this guy is going to piss off so-and-so on a regular basis. But as I stated before, the groups I put together generally pretty durable, and the 2 groups I currently run, I've lost 3 players in 5 years. One of which had a fixed time he was leaving from day one. It was my little cousin, and we knew that he had to go into a big study program, so he was only going to be there a few months no matter what. And the other 2 were due to life issues outside the group. Part of why these groups are durable is because I don't let disruptors in to start with. And if I had to nail it all down to one thing, I'd say the place GMs get it wrong is that they don't ask the correct kind of questions in the correct ways. The questions you ask when vetting a player have to have a certain balance to them. Much like a good job interview, you need a way to get the information necessary to effectively gatekeep and to weed out the people who are, feeding you just what you want to hear to get a seat at your table. You've got to be able to say, I want those good people in who maybe just have some differences, but I need to look out for that person who knows that they're kind of in an interview here. One way you can do this is simply by asking what kind of characters they have played in the past and what they were thinking about playing in your game. And the signs are there if you look for them. This is basically sales 101 and it's job interview 101. People love to talk about themselves. They do. And if you give them the opportunity, half the time they'll give you all the information you need without you even really having to ask too many questions, just by getting some gaming stories from them. If the guy is looking at a character that uses 3 classes, 4 subclasses, a variant race that's further altered because he wants to use a variant racial bonus system, and he needs to worship this god from a specific campaign world, yeah, you probably got your power gamer on your hand there. Ask him for some best gaming stories or favorite characters, and don't be surprised when he comes up with some tale about a combo of abilities that breaks the game and should have never been allowed with to begin with. So you see something like that, and you see, this guy always plays these rule-heavy classes, always looking at these specific abilities, is always thinking about how he can stack this score and that score together for the best effect. Maybe he's not the best person for your kind of more restricted story-based game where there's a lot of diplomacy and stuff. Same thing, if you got somebody who's all about 14 tells you about their 14 pages of backstory and all this other stuff, maybe they're not the best fit if your group is doing a lot of dungeon adventuring, because they're not going to have a good time, and board players tend to be disruptive. So a few things that I'm looking for also are behavioral tics. And here's a good one. When they tell you about something a character of theirs did, you point out that it shouldn't work, and then their reply is something along the lines of, well, you see, I had this item that I didn't tell you about earlier, and I had this special homebrew race that I didn't mention specifically, so I could correct you when you made that statement based on the information I deliberately omitted. This is a sign that a player is going to be a serious pain in the ass. The kind who asks the GM about something specifically designed to get a correct answer so that they can then exploit it for some kind of profit or unfair advantage later. We've all seen this kind of stuff. They come in and they say, well, I did this, that, and the other. And you say, well, that wouldn't work because of this set of criteria. I mean, that's not the way it works. And then they turn around and say, well, it does work because of this thing that I left out that totally altered the situation. That is a deliberate tactic. They leave those things out specifically so that they can be cool with their how I know more, how I know better thing. And those players can be a pain in the ass. So that's something that I specifically look for because they're going to keep doing it throughout the entire game. If players seem fixated on a particular aspect of a character, that's another thing that I look for as a behavioral tick because it can be assigned depending on what it is. Such as I once rejected a player because he was dead set on worshiping a specific deity or an equivalent thereof that combined with a few other puzzle pieces showed me that he either wanted to use my game to explore his unconventional sexual fetishes or he wanted to inject his socio-political messaging related to those fetishes into the game and as a defining feature of his character. And I'm sorry, pal, but my table is not your soapbox. So you look for those things, and you do it by asking questions about what they want to play, how they want to do it, what their thoughts are, what they've played in the past, and you can see those trend lines. I'm going to say this, and a lot of people hate this saying. Stereotypes exist for a reason. If every single character, if they have a history of obnoxious character types, you can pretty much guarantee that that's what you're going to get out of them in your game, whether they try to start that way or not. You look for that, a history of obvious character types. I'm not talking about the guy who always plays a support role or who prefers to be the rogue or thief or infiltrator type. I'm talking about the guy who mentions fondly his obvious joke characters or who seems to have a deep catalog of oh so cool, edgy, misunderstood loners. Does his role fit in your current game? Will it fit long term? And will it not wear out its welcome by session 3? Last but not least, the best thing for vetting players is to let them self-select. Flat out tell them what your group is like honestly. And if they pass your scrutiny, do the same with your group when you ask them for their thoughts. Hey man, sounds cool. Looks like you might be great on board and can't wait to play with you. Just know that we are R-rated violence and at worst PG-13 rated social content. You decide you want to chase the barmaid skirt in town, your role play is just going to be a charisma check and then possibly a save versus disease, and that's it. We're not going into any detail. It's not even so much fade to black. We're not even going to get to the point where the screen starts getting dark. Typically, if you tell the woke activist player that your group jokes about everything from race to culture to religion, he's likely to self-select his way into a different group. Same goes for that 5e superhero player. When you point out that you will in fact have killed players, or player characters rather, and that death saves in your game consist of rolling 3d6 6 times and assigning the results to your choice of attributes. That 5e superhero player is not going to play at the table that is like, hey, I have an average character death rate of 1 every other session. At the end of the day, vetting new players is one of the hardest things to teach. But all the ways you're doing it wrong most often boil down to focusing more on getting a new player to the table instead of making sure the player fits the table in the first place. In the end, as a GM, the table has to come first. It's been a little rambly. I know this one has been a little tight and a little tough to follow. And a lot of it's because vetting players is really about asking questions and then listening to them talk. And it can be real difficult when you're in a public setting. You got to have some players for this game shop game. You don't have time for 20 minutes a person. And it's real hard to get a private audience, so to speak. In that case, you really need to boil it down, knock out 4 or 5 questions, get some quick answers, and say, you know what, this guy's already starting to do horny bard trope. I probably need to keep an eye on him. and be ready to step in and say something if he gets out of hand. Same deal. It's like in that situation, maybe that joke character is not so big a deal because you're only playing this one shot at this game table. But maybe Mr. Brooding Edgelord is just going to be obnoxious because it's going to take so long for him to get into the game that you're going to spend the entire session just trying to get his ass to buy into the adventure. And then congratulations, we got 30 minutes to do the entire game because we had to spend all this time with Mr. Edgelord, giving him a reason his character would do that in our 3-hour game at the game store. So it's very difficult to kind of say, here's some concise advice on vetting players. All I can do is say, trust your gut because your gut's usually right, and make sure you take into consideration all the particulars of your game. Are we recruiting long term? Are we recruiting short term? How much leeway do we have to kick people? How important is it that the group is able to get along long term outside of the game? Take these in with you. And then when you ask questions about how they play the game, listen for those read between the line moments where they tell you the way they're going to behave simply by giving you stories about how they've played in the past. That's all I've got for now. Like, share, and subscribe. Get your friends over here to do the same. And I'll see you guys on Monday for Intelligence as a Dump Stat.